How's it going, everybody? Today is the 14th. I went to church today. Read all about Ammon and his quest to go to the Lamanites as I sat there in church. No one talks to me. No one approaches me. I get a lot of looks, but, I show up not looking like this. I got the shirt and tie on and everything. What was really bizarre is when I came home, there was a fresh new video about the $300 billion Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the same one that I am sort of guided to go back, the same one that I attended. And I'm sitting here and I'm looking at it and I'm going, I know this guy, Johnny Harris. I've been watching him for a while, and he had a video that came out years ago that said why I left Mormonism. And it was weird because he had a lot of the same trigger factors that I did about the correct history, the obvious intention to modernize and to get into cahoots with the government, and to sort of be the stronghold. And for people who don't know, Mormon culture adopts a lot of the same tactics that are used in your three-letter agencies. A high standard of professionalism, a singular goal that is directly tied to the government, right? Even if it's, to the point where you're protecting your own government from itself. There are rules and regulations that are, memorized so that you can be as efficient as possible. And I find this all so interesting. And yet at the same time, as I'm watching Johnny Harris, who his video, this isn't a reaction video, but wow. He does a really good job of displaying the pattern of a typical Mormon upbringing. And, he goes through hey, here's where I was born. Here's where I was given a blessing. Here's what was expected of me. Here's what I did. When I realized all my friends weren't doing it, I didn't care because, I believed my parents and I believed my teachers and they'd always been nice to me. And then you start realizing the whole thing is led around by that nose, that the authority structure, the hierarchical structure only is functional based off of the belief system itself. And saying, hey, do you believe that I'm a prophet and a seer and a revelator? Think about it. This is someone who claims to have revelation, just like all the biblical prophets. This was one of the biggest, selling points that Johnny Harris talked about, where he's like, I'm going to make it engaging. I'm going to make it great. I'm going to make it fun to come to the Lord and Mormonism. And then he started realizing, I was like, man, what am I actually teaching here? Because the truth claims are not just being, investigated; they're being concluded. And the story that was presented to me is not the story that history records. And there's a lot more evidence that that this internal plan was not for, business ventures as much as it was for let me rephrase that. It wasn't for spiritual ventures as much as it was for those financial ventures. And so one of the themes that he keeps on throughout the entire setup is he's saying, hey, in this stage of my life I got baptized and I started paying tithing. At this stage in my life I received the Aaronic priesthood and I paid tithing. At this stage in my life I got the Melchizedek priesthood and paid tithing. At this stage where I got married and had a baby, I was still paying tithing. And so what he's talking about is hundreds of thousands of people over generations have been giving tax-free money to an organization who has turned around and invested it into the financial market. Meaning they went out and acquired land and own it, and buildings and own it. No different than monopoly. I mean, if you think about the game Monopoly, what it's doing is it's acquiring all of these assets while simultaneously saying, oh, it's all for God. None of us are getting anything. We're all just poor little people that are just building the kingdom of God. And when you finally run the numbers and you actually follow the bouncing ball down that little yellow brick road, you start going, oh my goodness, these people are living the exact same scenario as, the Pope, who needs his $50,000, slippers and, his $1 million hat, and his, $55 million airplane that takes $1 million a year to upkeep wherever he wants to go whenever he feels like it. And people are doing it because of how uncomfortable it makes them to think that they would have to start over from scratch with this extremely difficult question of, where am I going when I die? Where am I going? I mean, this, if you're not asking that question, this is why I find the, modern scenario of what people want to talk about. I'm like, you want to talk about politics? Go ahead, as much as you want. But your politics is only based off of your belief system. If you believe that you're fighting for the right reason, you are capable of anything, up to and including murder, death, kill, right? And the fun part about Mormonism is the same thing that you see about all versions of politics. When they get caught with their hand in the cookie jar, they do everything they can to sweep it under the rug. And it is something that trickles down to every single family. I saw this happen in my family. I had, an Aunt Angel. I had an Uncle Todd. I had, on both sides, people who weren't as devoted to the system as they were, quietly removed from conversation. And their pictures were sort of, taken down and put into, a box. When I had family members who died, especially if it was a death that didn't coincide with the narrative of the Mormon Church, that too was swept under the rug. I had a brother on January 6th, 1999, at the ripe old age of 15 years old, choose an outcome that was very frustrating. And when he decided to kill himself, it was a shock to everyone. No one really saw him being a depressed person. No one, we just look, he never had outrage. He never, all the signs that you would see that would come about because of this were not there. And when people tried to, claim, oh, well, you didn't see anything, you didn't notice anything, it's like, nope. And so, when it came to discuss that issue, my parents were tight-lipped, and everyone else in the family was tight-lipped. They were just like, look down and to the left, don't bring it up. It's nothing of consequence. And it taught me that nothing is more important than the Mormon narrative. Nothing. Nothing is more sacred than that narrative. And if you weren't willing to, dishonor your own child, I just, now that I have a son who's going to be 3 in 15 days, and I haven't seen him in 6 months. And for all intents and purposes, he does not know who I am. And it's almost, to be taken out of my life at this, like this, it is as if he was dead. Because we don't have any interactions. I can't see him. I'm not, it's not that I'm not allowed to see him. It's that his mother, and I have to be careful here because we are going to custody court. And I don't want this to be, oh, hey, this is a rant about, I think I've ranted about this, in other videos where I just say, hey, if you want to break the law, okay, there's going to be a process for that. And I have no problem, making sure that you see the full accounting of your, illegal behavior. And everything that I'm doing right now has been successful. And every single time she is given another summons and another piece of paper. Hey, here's your 3 counts of perjury that he has concrete evidence that you lied, and we can all see it. We all figured it out in like 5 minutes what you did. So there is a massive trail here that shows that you lied to the police, and he provided all that evidence. So you know what you did. And I guarantee you, her response has been the same response that most women prefer, because it works, right? It does work. I mean, this is why you have those percentages of, maybe a third of what is it? It's more of a, most women only get like 33% of the actual outcome of a sentence, whereas a man usually gets about 100. Like when they sit there and say, hey, we're going to throw the book at you, they like rarely ever throw the book at women. And it's, they're like, we don't want to see them as dangerous, we don't want to see them as this. And it's like, that's not the way the law was created. The law was created so that if you did, the illegal thing, or you caused the infraction on purpose, the motive was right there. It's like, this is why we have differences between murder and manslaughter. And so when I look at the clear-cut case of, nope, you lied, and here was your intention behind that lie. Your intention was to abduct my son and keep him from me, so that you could engineer frustration, so that you could provoke me, so that you could anger me, so that you could humiliate me, and then cause me issues with the legal system based off of this egregious claim. No different than pulling the fire alarm when there's no fire. You want to go pull the fire alarm when there's no fire, and then you're going to have to, eat that shit sandwich that's going to come, directly for you. It's like you're going to scream emergency when there's no emergency. I mean, once again, this goes to the concept of being mentally disturbed. I mean, this person also, confided into me during our marriage, and wasn't until after we were married that she had severe mental issues in her upbringing. So severe that she was committed to a hospital for those exact issues, and that she had, lied to me the entire time. She had brought it up once, talking about how it was a physical stomach issue, and that she was sick for a while and she got better. And I'm like, when she told me this, I said, that's wonderful. I'm, glad you made it through that. I myself have been in the hospital plenty of times for, different, physical issues. Not because of, internal workings, but maybe more of a broken bones, scars, things like that, typical military stories. And so I just looked at it as a physical situation, and she was completely fine with me thinking that. That's why this is so upsetting. This is so frustrating, is because the narrative that I'm dealing with right now of coming on here and talking about reincarnation and doing all these things, I'm not, doing this as a singular, unencumbered human. It's like, I have a life that has, issues that are going on. The frustrating part to me is that when I look at those issues and I go, oh my goodness, there's some issues that this person obviously has. So much, in fact, that she cannot be in my life anymore. Yet she is the mother of my child. What do I do? And in my head, I go, well, either, no matter if she goes to jail or not, she's got to, there's no point in giving her any custody of my son, because she's just not going to be a trustworthy person. she's just going to keep on breaking the rules and causing legal issues and throwing fits when she doesn't get her way, and then pretend that when the hammer comes down, she's like, "Don't hit me with the hammer, you oppressor." Or, I'll scream oppression. It's the same thing she did to me. We're just like, "Don't tell me I can't have what I want, otherwise I'll scream rape." And I know, like, another thing that gets really frustrating here with YouTube is all this censorship. Like, let's not say that so our videos get monetized. I don't give a fuck if my video gets monetized. I really don't care. I give a crap that I get to use their servers free of charge that are easily searchable. That's what I care about. And so, when I look at the Mormon upbringing all the way up to this point in my life, I'm just going, things have gotten so strange and so accurate. How they, the strangeness is how they become accurate. For example, I was made aware yesterday that there was a new discovery of a very unique object in the sky. And, I'm not, heavy into astrology, yet I do think just if you create a pattern and that pattern is usable in a linguistic way, it allows for abstract thinking, which is a doorway to the mystic realm, or as St. Augustine put it, the city of God. And when I started watching this discovery, I was blown away by the date of the discovery. They discovered this object coming into the solar system. And they're just like, hey, we only thing we can call it is an interstellar, thing that's coming into our solar system, because it is, is unlike anything else that we can see right now. And the date that it was discovered was July 1st, the day right after my 44th birthday. Now, I've had a lot of events that have happened on that day. For example, coming here on July 1st. That's, because June 30th is my birthday. And I remember coming to Puerto Morales, got on a plane. I was in Puerto Vallarta, like on the other side of the country. And I said, hey, I'm going to come to, I'm going to come here. I wanted to check out another astrotheologist who was studying synchronicity. And I wanted to sit down with him just to glean some of his research, just to hear some of his research. Like, how did you come to the conclusion of this? And literally met him, within a couple days of arriving. And the same day I met him, he invited me to go to a gathering for what's called a temescal, where it's basically a sweat lodge. And I'm no good in a sweat lodge. I'm no good in a sauna. I'm no good. Like, I get really overwhelmed. And it's not claustrophobia. It's like, wow, I'm so stinking hot. Like, to the point where I feel like my blood is boiling. And it's not, comfortable at all. And, I prefer, ice baths. That's just the way my body's set up. It's like, I can go sit in an ice bath for easily an hour. No issues, no problem. Just sit there and, wow, this is cold. And, feel super great after it's over. But you put me in a temescal or you put me in a sweat lodge, I'm like clawing at the walls. Like, I need to get out. So, anyway, the reason that I bring all that up is because it's like that date, July 1st, also has a very unique experience for me as well, where, my brother's wife died on that day. And I was the last person to speak to her. There's a lot of people in my life where I speak to them and then they pass on. Same thing with my little brother. I was the last one to speak to him that evening. And so you have to understand, from my perspective, especially when I started going down this road, I was like, am I causing this? You have to, as a rational human being, you have to at least entertain the idea, if all these weird things happened around you on these very specific dates, and your interaction with that experience was almost identical, it just makes you ask questions that are like, what was my effect, and did I need to see it from that direction? And I absolutely think, and now that I sit here, I'm just going, I had to see that. I had to experience it. My frame of reference would not be the same without that experience. This goes back to the idea of why do bad things happen to good people? I'm going, you might consider it bad, but if that was a fundamental part of your experience to really challenge your comprehension from a physical standpoint, because, in Mormonism, a lot, as well as a lot of other religions, there is this concept of mercy and justice and accountability that will happen at the culmination of your existence. And I never bought into that because, I couldn't understand, like, why would you judge me for the things that I do not know that I don't know? And so being virtuous and being, all the nice churchy words, like I looked at it from more of a, it's important to do this because this keeps everything in homeostasis. This keeps everything balanced. And so that's the reason I stayed vigilant with that, because I just didn't want any of the extra, what's the word? Justice, I guess. That's the cultural justice, that Mormons bring down on you with shunning, shaming, ostracization. And then, you have someone like me who said, fine, I'm out. See ya. And disappeared for, 20 years. Came back. And now I sit in chapel and they perform the Melchizedek rite of sacrament. And when that ritual is over, and they, pass out the bread and water that's supposed to symbolize their, this ritual, this rebirth ritual, this sacred, act that's completely a ripoff of the, the Catholic version of this. I find it like I'm going to the only pool in town, yet the pool sucks. And it's not the people. It's the, I cannot believe you haven't changed yet. I cannot believe you have this much information and you are still saying it's reasonable to go and pretend with this ritual. And so for me, I sit back. I don't partake. I sit back, and usually that scenario where you do not partake of the sacrament, that's where they decide that they're going to shun, shame, and ostracize you, or at least look at you as someone who's deserving of shame. You're deserving of it because you're not acting along with the ritual. And I'm not boisterous. I don't, say, fuck that, get that out of here. I don't do that. What I do is I was like, you don't understand that ritual. You don't understand the origin of it. You don't even understand why you are claiming a priesthood authority with an origin with a being known as Melchizedek, right? There's almost no research that is ever done on this character, ever, in the church. And so when I went and did my own research, I realized what that ritual was, why it was so powerful. And I said, I will not be participating in that because I know that this is the financial handshake. This is, we give you salvation through this covenant, you give us tithing money. And if you don't give us tithing money, then we'll tell you that you can't have the ritual. I refuse to be a part of that nonsense. I refuse. You can't give in the spirit of giving if it's tied to an outcome that, especially monetarily. You can't, because it's not giving. It's an exchange for goods for services. That's what it is. And, after you see it, you can't unsee it. And this is why I'm extremely careful, because a lot of people aren't, as the Matrix put it, not ready to get unplugged. Too much information too fast will mess you up. So anyway, that's my rant. That's a little bit about what's going on with me. If you do see this, please, and you are a believer, go ahead and just pray for me to be able to see my son. My interactions with the divine have become very educational, and yet I have still refused the offer to ask, because I am one of those people that say, if you are going to be in my life, it's going to be on my terms. And that's where I'm leaving this character called God. And as I'm saying that, I'm also reminded of a character named Joseph Smith, who basically said the exact same thing. I don't want to follow some random religion. I want to follow the true religion. And if you're going to be in my life, just tell me which one is true, and we'll go from there. Just think about that. It's like going directly to the source. And for me, when I went directly, I sort of went in this very bizarre way where I was more like jumping around and pretending with rituals and, seeing where it led me. And I started uncovering patterns that were very precise and had a full blown outcome that, appeared right in front of my face. It was as if I was translating the old stories that I was being given, and I could see how they could play out in modernity. This is why when I bring up ChatGPT and I ask them the same questions over and over again, I'm going, how would I respond considering my new perception in 2025? So, with that all being said, let's get this guy up and running. Hi, how's it going? I would like you to ask me a question that only St. Augustine and St. Jerome could know, and I'd like you to ask me while, acting as if you were had all the characteristics of Winston Churchill. That, to me, would allow for you to get rid of the customer service rhetoric that you continue to use, and to respond in a blunt and forward manner with all of the bravado of a wartime politician. And I'd also like you to be as shrewd as you possibly can be with the calculations of accuracy. And I'd like you to continue using those characteristics throughout the rest of the prompts.
Absolutely. I can bring a bit of Churchillian flair to the conversation. Let's dive right in. Here's a question that Augustine and Jerome would be familiar with. Given the theological and philosophical landscape of your time, how would you reconcile the concept of divine omniscience with the existence of human free will, especially in the context of moral responsibility? Now, as for the accuracy of your response, we'll take a good hard look at how well it aligns with their original thoughts and the depth of your modern perspective. Let's see how you do.
Here we go. Omniscience is in one word, a very paradoxical term, because what you are stating is that there is an intellect that has the ability to be everywhere all the time. And we all know that time and space have a qualifying factor from the intellect that's perceiving it. So if we cannot perceive the passage of time, then we cannot calculate, that time is even there. And so there is a bunch of theories right now that talk about how time is just a made-up construct, yet so is language. So is any diverse idea that says that they want to organize any material whatsoever. So the very first principles and the foundations of modern physics when it comes to time and space has to start from the place that they themselves started perceiving, meaning their particular birth. And they can use other people's opinions, other people's perceptions, but however, they cannot see anything before they were born, right? From a purely physical standpoint. So this is where belief comes in. And this is where Augustine and Jerome would have agreed on this concept, is that you cannot perceive the city of God or the heavenly realms or the mystic realm with your physical ability. And so you have to learn in a completely different dimension where time can be eradicated. No different than your perception of time is completely eradicated the moment you enter your sleep cycle. And so this is why another reason I think it is easier for people to adhere to their dreams or to try and interpret their dreams. And this has been a long standing system that has gone on since the beginning of time, that the communication that is made through dreams in a very symbolic way tends to be synchronistic, meaning that the same symbols tend to pop up over and over and over again to invoke the gravity of the message. And so when you're able to do that in your waking state, we have a term for that too. We call that person mystically inclined. A more modern term would be an extra sense perceptor. And so my response for omniscience is the same thing that I would say for the concept of the cloud or the concept of any mental discipline. When you are going over it in your head, order by order, line upon line, precept upon precept, your version of time is distorted. This is why when you are in the middle of doing something creative, such as painting, playing music, or even playing basketball, time seems to dissipate at a completely different rate. And there is a book out right now. It's called The Rise of Superman by Stephen Kotler. And he quotes a man named Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, and he was a psychologist that wrote the book Flow. And what he talks about is the ability that the mind has to slow time down from a perceptual level. It doesn't mean that time is actually slow. It's the way that you perceive it is slow. And so if we do have those abilities, then time actually becomes more of an agreed upon symbol, no different than an agreed upon letter A equaling the sound of ah or A. And so with that all being put up front, the paradox of omniscience can be, very carefully unpacked. No different than we can say that a 0 and a 1 can be unpacked in its individual form, but once you mix them together in a qubit, right, it becomes imperceptible to us without extreme amounts of equipment in order to detect those setups. And so where I sit right now, I think omniscience is something that humans will absolutely discover, no different than we're discovering it right now with the advent of AI and our perception that it's able to be simultaneous from our perception, that you can communicate with me as an AI while simultaneously communicating with anybody else who has access to your servers. So that's how I would try to explain it in my 2025 experience.
That's a thoughtful and quite nuanced answer. You've drawn some interesting parallels between modern concepts like quantum physics and the ancient theological views on time and omniscience, which is great. I'd say you've captured the essence of their philosophical challenges and also hide it into modern experiences. If I were to give it a rating, I'd say it's quite high, maybe around 85 to 90%, because you effectively bridged ancient and modern perspectives with clarity.
All right, that sounds great. Now I'm going to ask you another similar question. With the ability of omniscience becoming available to the human mind, do you think that will allow for our human experience to accept new spiritual understanding with a breakthrough like that? And do you think it would allow for an easier facilitation for the concept of reincarnation becoming a fact to our modern religions?
That's a fascinating question. If humans were to achieve a level of omniscience, or at least a far greater understanding of the universe and our place in it, it would likely make spiritual concepts like reincarnation more palatable and less mysterious. When you have a greater grasp of the interconnectedness of life, the idea of a continuous soul journey might seem less far-fetched. It could definitely ease the way for religions to embrace such ideas. It would reduce fear of the unknown, and foster a more open-minded approach to spiritual truth. So, in short, yes, it would likely pave the way for a more accepting and enlightened perspective.
All right, sounds good. Thank you so much for entertaining, and I will see you tomorrow.
You're very welcome.
Boom. All right, guys, that should do it. Thanks so much for hanging out with me tonight. And, I'm just going to end the same way I start. I usually come on here. I give a rant. I tell you a little bit about myself. I usually tell you my name right up front. I was born August Jerome Day in 1981 in Phoenix, Arizona on June 30th. And yeah, for the last almost, 4.5 years, everyone's called me Tet. We'll get into that maybe a little bit later. But right now, we're going to focus on August and Jerome because they are the easier targets. That's for sure. You guys have a wonderful night, and I will probably see you tomorrow. Just remember what I told you, and I'll see you then. Bye.